This was my methodology. I enjoyed it more though. Like I actually enjoyed the process to build this. If you are a solo builder or you're building a small team and you are the content writer and doing this, you have to actually like this. By a requirement, fun has to be near the top of the list. If you don't like writing it, if you don't like doing it, you're not going to do it for the months that it takes there. So everything I just said there is more or less secondary to, am I having fun while I'm doing this?
You find yourself posting every day only to find that no one's engaging with your content. So you continue to post the same content every single day. And again, no one's engaging with your content. Well, that is because you need to be tracking what exactly it is you are doing wrong and right and create systems to help you do that. And that can be pretty tricky, but that's why I brought on Brian Schuster today to walk us through that. Brian Schuster is the co-founder of Lucid Consulting, where he helps businesses talk about their business with clarity so they can close more business. Today, we're talking with Brian about how we can set up systems to analyze data, to create content, and to get more engagement, views, and ultimately more clients in the end. So Brian, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me on.
Love it. So let's start off with just kind of giving us an idea of Lucid Consulting. I actually had Garrett on an episode a couple months ago now, and so he kind of teed up some things that you guys have as your business co-founders. But can you give us an idea of like who you are, what you do, and who you do it for?
Sure. So we really got started because it started because we liked working with each other. And I already knew, I'd known Garrett for 2-3 years at that point. I was advisor one to his previous organizations. He had a lot of personality types that I've naturally been attracted to. And he came to me and said, hey, I'm doing marketing and design. And I really do pitch decks, websites, etc. I think if I bring you on, we can just bring it to the next level. What that was, we didn't really know. There was kind of a thesis around, we knew we would figure it out if we got working together, so let's start working together, right? What we ended up narrowing in on is that the problem we solved is that we really found out we did well on messaging. Over time, with the feedback we got here, it's like, we're really, really good with messaging, and we're focusing on folks who, in a system that should otherwise be working, with a product that works, team that works, organization that shouldn't have problem, they either can't raise, can't sell, or whatever, right? There's some hiccup. And it tends to be overly complex products, right? That's what we ended up, focusing on. So we ended up creating a set of services really to help those organizations, right? Which is, well, you can't get investment. So we're helping you create a better pitch narrative and really a deck that comes out of that to build it up there. You're having trouble explaining who you are. So we go and build you a website. Your brand doesn't communicate what you think it's communicating, or it's actually losing deals. So we build you a brand. We really built stuff like that up. And what we've started to get very good at is being able to sit with a founder and really pull out from them, like, okay, what's really the value in the essence of this that actually is exciting? What it really matters about this organization? And then being able to retranslate that, say, okay, we now know what the essence is. Here's how it's going to translate to a pitch. Here's what an investor is going to care about. Here's what a new client is going to care about. And what you're going to say during that time period. And now even moving into like outbound sales, right? Which is, okay, if I'm going to message somebody, what am I going to say that's actually going to get them interested? And that's what we focus on. And it tends to be early startups. Consultants actually are ones that we have a lot with. Sometimes coaches, but those tend to be the big groups we help.
Sure. Yeah, that's critical here is the messaging. I mean, that's for personal brands, coaches, consultants, agency owners. I feel a lot of them jump right into content creation, social content, YouTube content, even down to sales collateral, but they don't really know the magic words, if you will, or how to explain themselves correctly that actually attracts, convinces, and converts their clients. So what you're doing is God's work for many of us. But before we get into some of the things I talked about with content creation, speaking of, want to take a step back and do a little bit more of getting to know you, the origin story of you're in branding and messaging now, but I know you actually kind of have a little bit more of like a technical and systems background, I believe. So take us back day one. How did we get here? And what was kind of the day one for you getting into this industry?
Day one for me was all right. So I've been a software developer for a decade. And even before that, I was in what I'll call an operations professional. I worked really in the guts of the business and I really focused on here's a division of a company or here's the process. Here's a problem they can't solve. What is the thing we're going to do to repeatedly solve that problem? Right. And what we did. And that was like my real first career. And then I switched out of that mostly because I was, and this was like when I was 23, 24 years old, I decided I really wanted to know software development. I didn't know it. And that bugged me. And so I taught myself software development. And this was back in 2011, 2012. Boot camps around the country weren't there. I was in Indianapolis. The first boot camp there wouldn't come until 2014, I want to say, or whatever. So there wasn't a boot camp. There was barely even online courses at that point. So I really picked up a book, taught myself, and I slowly worked my way into development. I really like that. And I really started to get a name for myself in really technical operations where it's like, here's a tech system, here's what the business needs, here's how to do it as most cost effective. How do I take the limited resources I have and get something out of it? And I was at IBM doing that and I enjoyed the work. But I've always been interested in entrepreneurship in business. All my friends, even at that point, even though I was a consultant and working for Big Blue, were always entrepreneurs, people who started their own businesses, people my age, right? But people who did that. And like, I knew it's like, I can't say that I wanted to be them, right? Even though I've started a company, I'm not, I don't even consider myself the, I'm not the CEO. Garrett is, right? My co-founder is. But I knew it's like, there's something I have to understand about this. And for me, I knew the operations of the business and I understand what it takes to run a business. I understand what it means to build software, right? But I didn't understand what it meant to grow a business. And I really mean that at a tactical level. Okay, I'm running a business and I don't have customers. What do I do now, right? And that really bugged me. So this probably is back in 2020, 2021 that this really started to bug me where I'm like, okay, I want to understand that. And
Well, I
then,
want to pause there because I feel like that's such a common problem,
right.
especially many technical founders have, is they think in systems and they think in product, but the like marketing and sales and biz dev side of things is kind of like the afterthought, or even sometimes for many, a thought they just never even want to have because it's like, I'm a product person, I'm a systems person, and I think very kind of sequentially. So yeah, that's great that you had kind of that desire then, because you think of like the Steve Jobs and the Steve Wozniaks of the world, right? Like Steve Wozniak was the systems tech guy, and then Steve Jobs was like the marketer biz dev guy, and it's good to have those two. Maybe a little bit of a spoiler alert, but it sounds like that's kind of where you and Garrett kind of had a good connection there. So I think it's a good point that you're bringing up.
Right. And I think the thing that I've learned from founders who've dealt with this is that, especially if we're talking more technical founders, it usually starts with one, there's a very high dismissal rate among very technical folks that you'll hear things like marketing is bullshit, they're lying to you, whatever. And you kind of get this vision in your head of, or more like a delusion that, oh, if I just build the right product, it's going to sell itself. And they're going to do that, right? And they get in.
If I build it, they will come.
Right. And a lot of developers like who never really do anything with that, either one, they find a co-founder who hides them from that, right? Where it says just, I'm going to stick you in the corner, you're going to get paid well, but I need what you can do. So build the product and I'll take care of it. Or they go out into the world and decide, okay, I'm now going to do this for myself. And they very quickly realize that it's very different. It feels different. And that's the thing I realized. It felt very different. It didn't run by the same rules. And and I like doing the operations versus marketing difference because that's the big one that's there. So the big difference between the two is that like, if I'm in operations, I'm sitting here, it's like, okay, I have a fixed starting point. I know my resources. I know what I need to get done. And I have a fixed end point. I know what needs to get done. If I'm running a support team, I know I'm going to have so many support hours. I'm going to have so many things going on. There's so many demands on me, but I know what they are. And the expectation is 99% of the time you should get to completion. It is considered a failure if you don't do that, right? You're never given overwhelming issues, right? And so fixed beginning, fixed end. So it's like, okay, let's go through and iterate in the middle. And that's what I got very good at for a long time. Iterate over the middle. How are these things going to piece together? How do they work? Whatever. And you can often find optimizations, then you do better, whatever. Marketing has a very different beginning and end. First off, it's kind of open-ended on both sides. What I mean by that is, okay, so you're a new business and you have a go-to market strategy. And the thing is that, okay, what are we going to do? It's like, well, there's lots of things we can do. We could, like, for example, if your business decided, if your business grew to the size it is by running ads and it was profitable, that's a perfectly acceptable outcome. If you did it through content, that's perfectly acceptable. If your CEO has 10 buddies and they are the 10 top people in your industry and they buy from you because they're buddies, that's an acceptable solution. But when you start, it's not obvious there. So there's a lot going on, right? And the endpoint is also not really obvious, right? Where it's like, hey, like, we might do a channel, but it's not, or I should say, it's not that it's obvious, it's not known where it's going to end up, right? It's like, okay, if I run ads, I have kind of benchmarks I'm expecting, but what it's going to be for us is going to be entirely different, right? And we're not really going to know how it works there. So there's a lot of ambiguity that sits there. And I think a lot of technical founders, and this certainly happened to me, where it's like, you kind of get overwhelmed, right? Where it's like, geez, there's a ton of stuff. It all kind of have its own language and it doesn't quite fall into its own category. It's like, if I had to give a technical explanation, it's kind of like I was a data developer for a long time. That's what I did with a lot of my work. I built reports, I did a lot of analytics, and there's a language that data development goes in. Well, if you move over to networking, it seems like, well, they seem adjacent, right? If you're building data systems, you should understand networking. But as soon as you step into it, it's like there's a whole bunch of different rules, there's a whole bunch of different stuff. It seems very foreign. And so like you can't take the same playbook. You're working underneath a completely different thing. Marketing seems like that, and do that. So that was like the first few years where I was just kind of sitting there and going, it's like, God, this is weird, right? And I would be like, oh, I'm going to play with content, right? I'm going to do that. It's like, okay, that kind of worked maybe, I'm not really sure. I don't have more sales, right, to this. And this was back in, call it 2021, 2022, when I did my first company out of after IBM, which was a Web 2 to Web 3 development boot camp, right? And we didn't really have a growth strategy.
What inspired? Had you been posting content before that?
Yeah, I have. I mean, actually, I kind of got into content creation by accident. Funny enough, for Lucid, it is something that I have not gotten into myself. And there's a problem isn't the right statement. You need to understand where content generation falls into the spectrum of what good things are. But funny enough, I've only just started doing it more or less for business development. But I've built giant followings in the past before. Once by accident, and then by I guess on purpose, right? The first time was back in 2017, 2016. I decided I was going to write. And this is like the first time I didn't even realize I was doing really marketing at the time. I just decided I wanted to write. And so I was sitting there thinking like, but the problem was I was not very good at blogs. Like I couldn't sit down and just come up with a subject and do that. That was very difficult for me at the time. I didn't understand it. So like in posting on LinkedIn and Twitter and stuff, it's like that I didn't really understand. But Quora at the time actually was very easy for me. I went there and understood. It was like, oh, they asked a question and I can give a response. And I really liked that format. That was something that was really fun for me. So finally, I think it was probably in late 2015, early 2016, I decided, okay, let's actually make this work, right? I'm going to do this. And so I literally said, okay, I'm going to write 2 to 3 posts a day. I'm going to make it super easy for me to post. And I can give more details on this because this is actually kind of how I recommend people get into content, especially if they're starting. I'm going to make it as easy as possible to post. I'm not going to care about quality at all. Like that just is not even a remote of a concern. And I'm just going to start posting.
What would you define as quality at that point?
Anything that stops you from hitting the send button. Anything that stops you. And what I mean is like, and so what I mean is that like, look, I've seen this so many times where it's like, you're posting there and you'll feel this tension, right? Or whatever, where it's like, oh, especially early on, there's a different quality. It feels similar to like, because again, if you ever care about quality in anything, you'll get this kind of inner sense of, ooh, there's something wrong here. Like it can be as boring as a business report or an email, whatever. There's kind of this inner sense of, I'm not sure if this is right. And you don't necessarily why, but something's tingling you right. When you are experienced, that tends to be a good signal to kind of go for, right? Not always, but it's usually more attuned, right? You understand the environment you're in, what the impact is, and you have enough experience to know, I shouldn't send that. There's something wrong here, right? To pull out. However, that fails at the beginning because you think it's feedback. You think it's there, but really it's more fear manifesting in some way, right? Where it's like, ooh, what are people going to think about me, right? What are they going to do this? It's not really driven by direct experience. So for me, I kind of just made it a rule when I first started where it's like, look, I don't care about quality. What matters is output. I'm going to hit volume and I'm going to do these numbers and I'm just going to keep doing it. And at that point I had no goal. There was no real goal there. And for the longest time, nothing really happened, right? I started by posting on Core and I really focused on what my background was, which was data analytics and software development. Teaching software development actually was one that I really like. I still like it today. I'm not in, I'm not officially in software, but I love talking about it. And that really didn't take off, right? And did that. I mean, I probably got maybe 1,000 posts, 1,000 views a month or so, maybe a little bit more. So it's like a little bit less than respectable, but it's like I'm clearly on the platform.
Hey, Blueprint fam, if you're enjoying today's episode and finding my guest insights valuable, then you'll definitely want to subscribe to the Personal Brand Blueprint podcast as we drop weekly guest interview episodes just like this one. And on that note, you obviously also see firsthand how powerful being an effective guest like the one you're watching on this episode right now can be at attracting qualified, interested leads directly into your sales funnel. But I know what you're thinking. You want to get into guest podcasting, but starting feels confusing and overwhelming. What equipment do you need? And how do you look and sound great? And how do you turn listeners into leads? I know this because so many of my guests had these exact problems in the past. And that is why I created the Podcast Guest Mastery Blueprint. It's a simple but powerful breakdown on everything you need to look, sound, and convert great as a podcast guest. Everything from how to set up your recording area to what equipment you need to look and sound great on camera, and what to say on podcasts to stand out, be memorable, and earn the audience's trust. And then that one key strategy to turn listeners into leads. I'm telling you, this isn't just another checklist. This is a step-by-step blueprint to make sure you look, sound, and present your best on podcasts so you can convert that attention into leads and ultimately new business. I honestly was thinking about selling this for like $97, but I'd rather give access to this guide to my Personal Brand Blueprint podcast audience for free. So if you are ready to become a sought-after podcast guest and use it to generate leads and build your personal brand, then grab your copy of Podcast Guest Mastery Blueprint at davepoly.com/podguestblueprint. You can find the link to that in the show notes below. Again, that's davepoly.com/podguestblueprint and start turning podcast interviews into business. Again, it's completely free for being a loyal listener, so definitely check it out. Cool? All right, let's get back to the conversation. At this point with those numbers, did you have any type of goal in mind? Like, were you trying to grow a following, or a lot of times people see these numbers, and that's still decent numbers, right? To 1,000 views, whatever, that's 1,000 people. But did you have goals in mind of why you were doing it? And then were you discouraged at some of the early signs? And how did you kind of put your mental state in focus to continue?
I understand. No, I did not have a following goal. I did not have any goal in mind. The goal was I had an input-based goal, which is, did I write or am I writing? Right. That was it. It was more of it's kind of borrowing from Scott Adams from Dilbert fame. Right. He has systems versus goals. This was a very systems focused play here, where it's like, look, it's important for me to sit down every day. It's important for me to write. It's important for me to put stuff out there. And that's really it. There really wasn't, it didn't have an idea in mind. If there was any goal, it was kind of more of this loose idea of, I wanted to get better at writing. I wanted to get better at communicating my ideas and getting it out there. And doing this practice was the thing that got me there, right? And it just happened to be on Quora. So I did that, and I did that for about 9 months or so, somewhere around that range. And then all of a sudden, along this time, I started getting very interested in cryptocurrency. This was back in January 2016. So today, cryptocurrency has a look and feel that is whatever. And depending on your background, you have different feelings about it. Maybe positive, usually more negative there. Back then, no one knew what the hell it was. They heard of Bitcoin, whatever. Right. They didn't know, right? They just knew it's like, it wasn't, Bitcoin hadn't even really blown up, not to the level that it would go to. I think when I was making my first purchases, I think I could get a Bitcoin for less than 300, maybe even 200 or something like that, right? So this is early. And Ethereum, now the Bitcoin, I understood and I wanted to read it. And so I studied it on my own. Ethereum really fascinated me. And this was back when like it was nothing, right? This was just after the Kickstarter. It just launched. And so I started reading up on it after a friend Actually, I still laugh at this. A friend of mine who's a crypto founder, he's been in the field for like a decade now, sent me the Ethereum white paper in January of 2015 to say, "Hey, you should read this." And then I didn't do anything with it for a year. And then I finally read it, and I'm like, "Oh, this is cool. It looks like technology. It makes sense to me. It's programmable." And then as I started reading about it, I started going on Quora, and I realized, oh, people were talking about this. So I'm like, well, why don't I just start answering questions, right? Some of it was technical in nature because I liked it. Some of it was just BS, basically, where it's like, what's the price going to be? What's this? And I gave my opinion on it. But in January of 2017, I started writing on that. And that's when the first signal really took off, where I'm like, oh, I'm like doubled or triple where I was a month ago, which is only like 10,000 a month, right? I did that. And so I had my system in place. So I'm like, oh, I'm going to keep writing, you know, and I had jobs and other stuff, right? But I kept up with my writing and I just kept honing in on that. And I started paying attention. So I'll give my first system view here, right? And kind of what I've kind of learned about creating content here based off this. When I first started, there was no signal, or there was very little signal, right? There was almost nothing out there, right? And that's one of the things I've learned about marketing is that in like if you're in operations or product development or stuff like that, you can track incremental improvement, right? Or whatever you can say. A 10% improvement either direction is big, right? If you're 10% more efficient, you can actually measure that. In marketing, that's almost meaningless early on. Like a 10% improvement doesn't matter. It doesn't really matter that much, especially if you're not getting enough to support you. You're looking for home runs. That is the thing. You are absolutely 100% looking for home runs. You are not looking for the thing that brings in one or two people, you know, per period, right? Every 2 weeks. You're looking for the thing that brings in like massive wins, 10 times better than anything else you're doing. And to do that. I didn't know that at the time, but that's what actually happened. By moving to cryptocurrency, I was getting 10 times the result and I could feel it. It's like, oh, okay. And so at that point, all of a sudden, my writing finally shifted. Because before then, there wasn't a lot of content. I started getting my own style, but it was mostly getting comfortable in my own skin, is the way I would describe it. That's the way the content was. Then once I actually started growing, it was like, oh, there's a structure to this. And that's the first time I actually remember reading other people's posts. This is what's funny, right? This thing. I was on Quora. I had been on there for a year, never really read other people's stuff. I just wrote my own stuff, whatever. Finally, I wrote it and I was like, well, now that I'm growing and I can see where this is going, the stepping stones have aligned, I'm now interested. And I started looking at things like, well, what's their format like, right? What are they doing? Are they posting pictures or not pictures? How do they write their introductions, right? How do they do that? And I started doing it. And then because I already had a system, right? Because I already knew, well, I'm going to write 20 posts this week. So I know next week I'm just going to experiment on that, right? I'm going to tweak it, right? And then I started tweaking. I started changing what questions I was answering or whatever. And I really started honing in on, and it kept growing. Then finally, I've been doing that for all year. And then finally we got to, I think it was November of that year in 2017. I just left my job at A&E Media, and I was a cloud engineer for them. And I remember posting, and Ethereum was blowing up. This was during the ICO bubble, basically, right? Where a bunch of tokens were doing. Everyone was super interested. Everyone was talking about it. And one of the platforms they went to was Quora. And I remember really sitting down every day. And I literally went this is the only time it was this structured, like from 8 o'clock in the morning until noon. I really sat there and thought about what post am I going to write? What am I doing? What are the top things? And I started doing images. I started doing more research and started posting content out there. And that month, actually, within a 30-day cycle, I actually ended up doing, I think, 1.2 million views in that period of time. And I checked the platform, and it's like, oh, holy crap, I'm the top like writer. Like I don't know officially if that's a term, but I knew what all the major platforms were. I knew what all the major questions were. Everyone was on crypto. I was looking at, you saw my name, Brian, at the top of the list of all these things. I'm going, well, that's exciting, right? And I met a bunch of folks at that point, and that was exciting. So I'll pause here because I imagine there's stuff you want to dive into.
So, I mean, I want to go back to that kind of catalyst moment where you had a system in place, and let's kind of define system, right? Because you mentioned you were posting every day. At that point, how are you defining system? Is that just like habit, essentially, like every day I'm going to write, or was there kind of a little bit more involved to that we should be thinking about when we want to create a system for content?
It has to be more involved than that. right? I'd built the muscle memory at that point to do this where it was there. Because first off, like I was goals aligned, right? Where it's like me missing was like, because sometimes you set goals like going like, oh, if I'm going to lose weight. And then like it's like, oh no, there's a cake here, right? Because you're not actually, your spirit's not in it, right? You know,
Yeah.
sometimes there it is like,
This is a
screw
good
it.
time of year to talk about it with resolutions and everything. Yeah,
Right, right.
everyone's got their goals.
Exactly, right. But for me, it's like, you know, I actually cared, right? Where it's like if I missed it, I actually felt bad for it, right? That ended up helping. But like when I really first started, I was like, okay, what am I going to do to make this as easy as possible for myself to get this done? So when I really first started, I decided, okay, I'm going to set a time every single day. And really for something like writing that is as consistent, daily a daily practice is really where you should be starting. When you do it once a week, it's too easy to get knocked off. It's too easy to do that. So I really recommend daily. So I would say I set up a time. God, we're going back close to a decade now. I can't remember when it was, but it was like I think it was like in the morning before work, right? Where I do, and I think it was only 30 minutes. And I would literally, so I had my computer set up and I would open up my computer. I had my tab set up, and this was the other part of it too, where it's that when I said to make it as easy as possible, I changed my Chrome. So on startup, whenever I opened Chrome, it literally opened up Quora, right? So it was the first page, and it was the only page that was there, that was sitting up. And it's like, okay, I'm on the home page of Quora, so it's a prompt. On my phone, it was on my dock. Every time I opened my phone, it was right there, sitting there for me to look at. And then for me, I basically decided, like, you know, I kind of came up and really early on to get yourself kickstarted. It's kind of like I would even get it down to the step process where it's like I'm going to go to the MOOC page, which is a massive open online course page, right? That's what we called courses back in the day. And I would go there and I would check the top questions and I would pick the first one, right? Or something like that. I mean, really, really specific. And then that was it. That was really the goal, right? In doing that. And so really like the actual part that ended up becoming the practice, really, especially in the early days, was the alarm's going to go off or my phone's going to notify me or whatever the system was. I'm going to go to the computer. I'm going to sit down, open it, answer the first question, type out something and send it, right? So what didn't I say there? I didn't say it has to be of this quality. I didn't say it has to be of this thing. It didn't say it has to be here. It was really focused on the actual tactical experience of sitting and writing and doing that. Mm-hmm. And after doing that for about 30 days for myself, like it eventually got to the point where it's like, and really I credit that to putting it on my phone. That's the thing that really got me. Because at first it needed to be the computer where it's like, I need to sit down in front of my computer in my basement and write it out. But eventually it got to the point where I'm like, oh, I want to write about something, right? Or whatever. And I open up Quora and I find a question that's slightly related. And then I start writing about it, right? And the next thing you know, it's like, oh, it's 2:00 and I already got my 4 posts for the day. Okay, cool, right? And you moved on.
So what I'm saying, so what I'm hearing to kind of summarize this is when we think about like creating new habits, this is kind of like in James Clear's Atomic Habits book. Yeah. We say we have the goal of, oh, I want to write every single day. Again, going back to like New Year's resolutions, everyone has like, oh, I want to lose X pounds or I want to run a half marathon or whatnot. But it's less about just kind of making the goal, but it's more, what was more important, what made you successful here was detailing out the specifics of the routine and ensuring that you had steps every single day that you followed to run the system, if you will. And you also decreased the effort that it took to run the system. So like anything that would be a hurdle in your way, you removed and you made it easier to do. So if you actually map out what the step is that you need to do in order to accomplish the step and you reduce anything in your way that might distract you or be too much of an effort to get the task done, that was what kind of made you successful in maintaining consistency.
Yeah, it was the steps that got me to the step that mattered, right? And the other thing too that I don't hear as much in there because I've read James Clear. Before that, it was The Power of Habit that I read, right? That's where a lot of these ideas came from where it's like make it as simple as, to make it simple as possible, and just seeing like how dumb your brain is with dealing with issues, right? Like, okay, for example, one of my routines right now is I'm waking up at 5:00 in the morning, I'm walking my dog, getting up, and then I'm just sitting and I'm praying, I'm meditating, I'm doing the things there. But like I have only one chair in this office, right? And I have a second one here. I have a journal that's sitting over there. The effort it takes to actually physically take this chair and move it, it's got wheels. I can roll it. Not that hard. But this morning, I'm sitting there at 6 o'clock going, it's like, oh, I kind of want to journal, but I have to move the chair, whatever. That's how your brain actually works, right? You don't think it matters, but actually having like that thing of having Quora on my dock was the thing that probably got me over the hurdle because it was just so easy to hit, click, open it up, and now I'm involved, right? That's how your brain actually thinks. That's how it actually deals with most of the things in your life. So for me, having it all set up was actually easy. Now that I'm thinking about this, if I want to journal, I probably need to buy a second chair. Seems stupid, but that's how this actually works. The other thing that I learned, and this is the thing that they haven't really heard articulated, but it's the thing that I found really works, is that like, okay, so, and this has been true of for my content creation. This was fixing processes at IBM. This is building a growth system here. This has been the truth that I've learned about, through all these things. There's the kickoff of this project, right? And there's we are going to do something new, and it's big and exciting. And it says here, like, okay, I'm New Year's resolution time. I'm going to lose weight, or hey, we're going to be brilliant at the basics. That was one of the programs that we ended up writing. So we're going to do all these things here. And the first week, everyone is engaged and everyone is doing there. So they all go through the work. Then things move. Life happens. Things kind of move on. And that's the time that both your interest degrades and it goes below a point where you stop being as super engaged, right? And your brain is either just tired or focused on something else or whatever. And not a lot of work happens. And you'll notice this, like watch it. Watch between, like if you're on a new workout routine or thing or whatever, watch between week 3 and 6 and see how you actually feel about it, right? To do this. That is the period where it's like, you need to almost expect no work, right? The only work you should expect is that, did you actually sit down and do it? So for content writing, for example, that's the period that is, you may even be brain dead when you go into this, but are you going to sit at your desk? Are you actually going to open up the laptop? Are you actually going to do the work? Or are you actually going to get up and actually go to the gym? And during that period of time, that's when the routine really gets set, right? And that's when a lot of the other stuff goes on and your brain's super engaged. Something really interesting happens around, I'm saying week 6, it can be earlier, it can be later, but something really interesting happens. You get over this latent yuckiness you feel internally, right? Where it's like, stops getting boring. You get used to it, it gets easier, and all of a sudden your brain re-engages. It doesn't re-engage like at the beginning where it's like, because it's super exciting, it's engaging with something else. And that's when all of a sudden a lot of the real magic starts to happen, because you start to go, man, I'm sitting here not getting a lot of views on this. I wonder if I go over to this page and do it this way, it could do this. Or, I've been going to the gym for, a little bit now, but I bet you if I do this, make this happen. Or, hey team, we've been doing this for 6 weeks. I bet you we can knock out twice as much this week, and it means we're going to get this and this. All of a sudden, re-engagement happens, and that's when everything really starts to hit off. That's when it starts to really engage. And it's almost like you got to get over that disengagement hurdle, right? That's the purpose of the rules. That's the purpose of putting it in Chrome for me, sitting down at the laptop, doing this. So you actually sit down to get over that. Because once you get over that, that's when kind of the true experience starts to build up.
Yeah, so let's talk about that, because it sounds like you hit one of those points where you were seeing success, and you, from what you said, started to go, well, let me check out other people's pages and see how they're doing it. So it sounds like there's kind of a second step here is, all right, first step, we need to stay consistent, right? And we need to map out what the actual daily habit is going to look like and reduce any of the frictions that are going to be potentially in place in order for us to maintain consistency. So consistency is my 2025 word of the year. But then next is kind of like research, it sounds like, right? Like you started to look into other people's content to see what they were doing, and that became a really big part of how you hockey sticked.
No, that's not what happens next, in my opinion. Here, in doing that, I didn't mean to be so harsh there. I'm just saying there's something there's something that happens in the middle. And this is the difference between operation thinking and marketing thinking, which is at some point it has to actually start working. There has to be proof of life, right? So when I first started writing, there was no belief that it was actually going to work out, that anything would come of it, right? It was just there. I wanted to get better at writing. I wanted to try something else, right? And that was more personal, right? But at work, something very similar happened last year. So for us, we grew like a lot of services businesses almost exclusively through two means: referrals and networking. And usually the networking was there. And it was just basically Garrett going off into Austin and just meeting founders. That was how we grew. And we knew we didn't want to do that. We wanted an actual funnel that we could rely on. So I said, like, okay, I want to actually go and like, let's try cold outreach. There's a lot of reasons why that makes sense. It's cheap, it's effective. It's worked for other folks, maybe it'll work for us. And so I kind of did the same system thing, right? I literally sat there where it's like I set my metrics, I set my goal, I knew what I was going to do every day. I sat there and did it every day. And I did that for about 8 weeks or so, right? Or something like that. Then after about 8 weeks, we actually made a sale doing this process. And we're going, oh, so this actually works. Like there's proof of life here, right? To do this. And that was kind of the turning point there. So I'm not explaining that system. Let me go back to core and what happened. I did all of those steps and I was writing, and I was more or less happy to keep that there. I basically knew I wanted to do writing. I wanted a content system at some point, and I wanted to do it. And I was just going to keep up to it. The thing that took place is that it actually grew. It actually legitimately grew in a way that I knew there. And I'm like, oh, okay, it actually works. That was the point that made me flip over. And that's all of a sudden where the books matter, right? And what I mean by the books matter is most people who write on content generation usually talk about you found that point, right? Or at least that point is somewhere in view where you've done that. And it's like, now you need to do this. Now you need to do this, right? And it's kind of like, like, okay, once Mr. Beast hit 100,000, subscribers, all of a sudden he knew it was serious. And that's when it's like, okay, we make the turn. Before that, it's a very different game. So for me, it's like there has to be proof of life to do that. And the reason there has to be proof of life is that it's very low signal before then, right? Very low signal. Like for me, I was getting like a few thousand views a month. And if I had just tried to go directly towards become really big, I never, ever, ever would have gotten big doing data analytics or software development or anything. I would have had marginal audiences to do that. It was only after switching to crypto that I actually got the hockey stick. I'm like, oh, and doing that. And I couldn't have predicted that. Once I got that, then all of a sudden, a lot of that stuff happened there. So I think I really do believe there has to be proof of life, and you have to do the things to eventually get to proof of life, right? You have to do enough to get lucky.
Would you say
If you
then?
will.
But so you're saying when you made the switch to crypto, you saw more of the hockey stick. Would you then kind of point to maybe content market fit then, if you will? So like if you are consistently creating content and publishing it into a market or audience that maybe there just was a misalignment in what you were talking about or what people cared about or what have you, and you saw some signs of life but not necessarily anything great, but then you shifted into a topic that then one was having a large spike at the time, but also you were adequately knowledgeable about to provide a unique take on, and et cetera, et cetera. So there was just kind of like a personal brand content and audience fit there that allowed that to take off.
I mean, it's funny. Maybe I will understand enough one day to give you a really good definition of this. So I just have to go with what is true. It really is, you know at that point. Like for me, it's like the most recent one is like, hey, is cold outreach something that's going to work to grow Lucid? And there was a point where we made a sale and we just looked at each other and we went, it's right, it fits, it goes through that, it does. And it's like there's probably some factors that can go into there that can do that, but the truth is that those factors were supporting an internal feeling I already had. I knew was right. It was validation. Now, if I felt good internally, but I looked externally, I was like, well, we're still not making money, and there's still a lot of problems. That would have made me question it. But no, it really comes from this internal space. And what happened with crypto is I was writing about it, and it's like, holy crap, I'm getting followers, a lot of followers. I'm getting comments, a lot of comments. I'm getting all this stuff. And so it just kind of felt right. And if you talk to anyone who has had sort of success like that, right? Whether or not they've built a business and they've hit some tipping point in it, their personal content, there will be this point where it's like, oh my Lord, it fits and it works there, right? And to do this, and it's like, And so what's unsatisfying about that is that, and this is the difference with marketing thinking versus ops thinking, you can't predict that. It is a totally unique thing every single time. Like today, I could tell you my exact plan of how I wrote this out, and you cannot recreate what I had. You cannot recreate 2017. You cannot recreate Quora at that time to do that. So it's almost like you have to mimic the system to help you figure it out. So like if I were to do this for LinkedIn today, if I wanted to blow up there, I'd be like, look, I would start taking a look at the subjects that people are talking about in mass. I would take a look at the formats that they're working on and what they're doing. I would take a look at this. I would do some pre-studying, right? But like probably no more than an hour. I really wouldn't study more of that. And then I would create a system. I would probably do a daily sitting down where it's like, I'm going to sit down daily. I'm going to write up on subjects and I'm going to publish every single day. And I would do that until something happened, right? And I would really keep varying the subjects. And I know for LinkedIn, headlines matter a lot and other stuff like that, but it's the subject matter that matters.
Yeah. So what is that iterative process too? Because when you're putting out content, is it that you're continuing to throw the same pitch, or are you throwing the pitch, seeing if they swing at it? If not, let me, change it up and make my tweaks and do more research. And what's kind of the iterative process to find that
Well,
that
there's
moment?
there's two sides of it in the way that you operate in the way you do, especially for content. I really do believe people like reading stuff that you like writing, right? So it's like you have to enjoy it, right, to do this. So here's what I would say. Here's part of what I would say to kind of give you like what was my idea about this. If you're having fun with the subject and you're just following your own interest, you naturally get the benefit of experimentation, right? You're naturally getting it. And it tends to be subjects you are personally interested in, right? LinkedIn, I did not blow up as much. I mean, I'm happy I have 20,000 followers today, right? Whatever. It wasn't compared to Quora. But even then I had many articles that blew up, and often was just following my own trend, right? Where it's like, hey, I'm interested in this particular subject. And so that kind of does the benefit of, that natural experimentation if you follow your interest. If you had to, though, what I think is the bigger topic it's subject matter on what specifically you're talking about is kind of the first one. And then the way you talk about it is probably the second, right? And do that. And the way you talk about it can be everything from your tone of voice, the structure of the content, even the medium, right? I mean, on LinkedIn, you can do a video, you can do an image, you can do text, right? You can vary all of those. And usually speaking, it's like subject usually dominates everything, like whatever subject you're talking about, right? But usually you don't hit that hockey stick until you're in a subject, and it's like what the way I would think about it is you pick a subject and you start to get heartbeats and flutters, right? And it's like, oh, there's something, but it's not consistent, right? And usually that means right subject, raw and medium, right? You're not getting it there, right? And then you kind of start to play around with, okay, well, I found the subject, but now I need to play around with how I'm talking about it. Maybe I need to be harsher. Maybe I do this, right? And what's consistent. And then eventually you just, lock key, you figured it out, and eventually you get into that. And it becomes that second game of optimization. That's how I've always played around with it.
Sure. So it sounds like focus on the what, and as soon as you find some signs of life on the what, then start playing around with the how.
Right. But that's the thing. I'm being very cautious with how I talk about this because I know how I got here. And it's like this was my methodology. I enjoyed it more though. Like I actually enjoyed the process to build this. And if you are a solo builder or you're building a small team and you are the content writer and doing this, you have to actually like this. Like fun, like by a requirement, fun has to be near the top of the list. If you don't like writing it, if you don't like doing it, you're not going to do it for the months that it takes there. So everything I just said there is more or less secondary to, am I having fun while I'm doing this, right? Do I actually like doing it? I mean, my co-founder, Garrett, was phenomenal at video. He was very good at video. I saw his videos. He did long form. He did that. It's like, great. He stopped doing it. Why? He hated it. He hated it. Know what he does like doing? He loves going on podcasts. He loves doing interviews. So for our content strategy, I'm booking him as many podcasts as I can get. I'm getting him as many speaking events as I can get because that's what he actually enjoys doing. And Garrett is somebody who's this is a personality where he is perfect to be a content creator. He's like basically matched for it. He's got an interesting personality, interesting background, super opinionated. We're just trying to find the right medium for him to go into, right? But again, we're starting to now finally focus on that because there was actually something else that was more important, which was actually getting outbound correct, right? Which is actually where, like, if you don't mind indulging me, as we started Lucid, we had to prioritize because we're just two people. Now we're more than that, right? Because we've grown a fair bit over the last half year, but it's like we don't have a ton of resources to plan. And when we sat down, it's like, yes, we know the power of content creation. Like I just told you that story. We knew I had millions of views, and if we have millions of views, your conversion rate doesn't have to be that wide to be flooded with work, right? We understand that. But the problem is it's unpredictable and we don't know, when it's going to come out. So for us, it's like, look, we would love to do content or we would love to take it more seriously. This was back a year ago, but it's like, we need sales today. So we prioritize the hunting activities, right? The outbound, the networking, the going out there. And now that we've started to get a beat on that, it's not fully solved, but we can see the end of the tunnel where it's like, okay, we know how this plays out. We're now optimizing. Now we're starting to dip into, let's do the content activity because we can afford to spend 6 months really honing this in because now we know where our business can support it.
Love it. Speaking of your business, if someone was interested, because we talked a lot about content, and largely what comes with content is making sure you have the right messaging to put into that content, make sure you're speaking the right magic words. So if people were interested in learning more about Lucid Consulting and connecting with you, where should they go and how can they learn more about you?
The best place to find us is, one, go on our LinkedIn. We're posting regularly there and we're talking about this. And two, message us. Quite honestly, messaging us on LinkedIn is the best way to do it. We got into this business because we love early stage founders. It's almost a bad thing, right? Because like working with early founders has, the cash flow ends up being not a top priority, but we end up getting, we get to work with brilliant people and ideas. And if you have a good idea and you're working on this, you want to talk about it, we love discussions, right? To do this. LinkedIn is the first place. Website's the second place. Go to lucidconsult.ing, and that's where you can find us. And we have a whole bunch of details on what we provide. And really, it's we have our one-liner that Garrett put together. It's hard to grow your business when you don't know how to talk about it. Lucid helps you talk about your business with clarity so you can close more deals. That's really what we're all about, and it's how we've been so successful in the last year.
Perfect. Is there one final note you want to give our audience before we sign off?
Yeah, I mean, again, I've been very lucky to grown a couple of audiences over the years. But if you're a solo person, you're a small person, you're trying and you know content, it is the best platform you will ever own. It is one that you can use to grow your business. It is absolutely the best. It is unpredictable, and the only way you can get over that sucking period, right, is just having so much fun you're not even realizing it's going on. That's what worked for me, and that's what I would say, and that's kind of my last line.
Love that. Let's put some fun back in business. It's not all KPIs and spreadsheets, right? Well, that is all for today's episode of Personal Brand Blueprint. A big thank you to Brian Schuster for being on today and walking us through how to think about content creation through systems, through habits, through iteration, etc., so we can start growing our audiences and attracting our ideal clients into our business. If you are looking to grow your personal brand, make sure to subscribe to the Personal Brand Blueprint podcast. Follow me, Dave Polikoff, on LinkedIn, as well as Brian. And check out davepolikoff.com to see how we can work together one-on-one. Thanks, and see you on the next episode of Personal Brand Blueprint. Today, we learned about my guest's origin story, unique methods, and credibility. If you want to see me break down how today's guests can use those tools within the Personal Brand Blueprint strategy to attract, convince, and convert new qualified leads so you can do the same for your business, then check out this episode here. Or if you want to continue to hear more incredible personal branding origin stories and learn more valuable personal branding skills from my awesome guests, then check out the full playlist of interviews here.